A lot has been said about the Super Mario Brothers movie. That it's too shallow, the characters paper thin, that the music is completely out of place. Worst of all, I've heard it called completely pointless. And yet, I'm here to tell you today, it's actually really good. And if you think otherwise, I think
you're nuts.
Okay, I'm kidding. I don't actually think you're nuts if you don't like the Super Mario Brothers movie. And whether or not those complaints are valid, it doesn't change the fact that this film delivered some of the most fun I've ever had in a movie-going experience, as it's more jam-packed with joy than my third grade lunchbox, which I still have. It just leaves you feeling good afterward, and I'm far from the only one who felt this way based on the overwhelming audience reaction. Even my parents, who have no nostalgia for Mario at all,
loved it.
See? So it has to be doing something right. Perhaps even a few things. Now look, I get it, it's not Lawrence of Arabia, nor does it have the emotional depth of the greatest movie of all time, Shrek 2 of course. But what the Super Mario Brothers movie is a really damn good time. And I have to wonder, if being entertained isn't the main point of film, then what is? And that brings us to why we're here today. Because there's a lot that the Mario movie had to get right in order to work as well as it does, let alone work at all, as the creators were given a nearly impossible challenge. Adapt a game series infamous for its lack of story and character development into a medium that relies on both. So to pull it off, the creators had to explore elements that Nintendo hadn't across nearly 40 years of Mario media, like working out a proper story, creating avenues for character development, and even rethink decades-old conventions to ensure the movie is the best possible portrayal of Mario that it can possibly be. All the while appealing to both longtime Mario fans as well as those new to the series, regardless of age, otherwise known as everyone. So as a scholar for all things Mario, considering I've been studying it my entire life, I'll be breaking down exactly why the Super Mario Brothers movie works as well as it does, including in ways I guarantee you didn't consciously notice. And that success starts where so many other adaptations have failed before it. If there's a single element we can point to that allowed the Mario movie to succeed where almost all others have fallen short, it's this. A complete lack of shame. This is Mario, only in movie form, unlike the countless video game to film adaptations that preceded it, including Mario's infamous other attempt. But this Mario movie makes zero concessions where it counts. Okay, maybe one small concession, but we'll get to that later. But when it comes to the characters, the world, the animated art style, most of the music, and even some story elements, this is Mario through and through. I mean, the very first thing we hear is the airship theme from Mario 3, which is used to underscore an invasion by an army of turtles against a kingdom of penguins, all in pursuit of the superstar hidden inside a block with a giant question mark on it. This movie has no shame, and that's partly why it's wonderful. If we compare it to just about any other video game adaptation, it's a night and day difference, with nearly all of them severely compromising the series' core identity, all in an effort to appeal to what Hollywood executives think the average person will want, even if that means twisting it into something that barely resembles the source material outside of a handful of token elements. Even the Sonic the Hedgehog movie, which by all accounts was a big success, barely looks like the games that inspired it outside of a 2-minute sequence early on. Otherwise, the movie takes place entirely in the strange land of Green Hills? Wait a second, you can't fool me! Even though Jim Carrey absolutely killed as Dr. Robotnik, this isn't the Eggman we know from the games. I probably don't have to remind you that even Sonic barely looked like Sonic before getting a last-minute overhaul. So as far as being faithful to the source material, it wasn't quite a home run, because the Sonic brand is more than just a sum of 1 or 2 characters. But despite this, it was still a fun movie, and arguably one of the better video game adaptations. But it's not exactly what comes to mind when you first think of a Sonic movie, and it absolutely still left a lot of hardcore fans wanting. Especially now that we're in the post-Mario movie era. And this is one reason why the complaint that the Mario movie plays it safe doesn't seem entirely fair, because by Hollywood standards, it did anything but. If we take a look at Hollywood's video game film adaptations before Mario, 32 of the top 35 were either live action or mostly live action with some CG characters thrown in, with the only exceptions being the 2 Angry Birds movies and Final Fantasy, which ended up being one of the biggest box office bombs of all time. And that actually might be why live action is the only path forward when it came to Hollywood adaptations, even with the occasional misfire, as it allowed the producers to leverage the strength of the IP, while also trying to reach the broadest audience possible, by anchoring those characters to a world and style they already recognize. And to be fair, maybe they weren't entirely wrong, as nearly every one of those live action adaptations made at least 2 to 3 times its budget, with many earning substantially more, which meant that live action was the safe bet. Or at least it was until Mario proved otherwise. As it wasn't just the first video game adaptation to gross over $500 million, but also the first to more than double it, ending with a box office total of $1.3 billion. Or 13 times its $100 million budget, which makes it not just a top-grossing video game adaptation by far, but the second highest grossing animated movie of all time at the time, just behind Frozen 2. All because Nintendo and Illumination dared to make a Mario movie that actually respected the characters and world we already knew.
That is cinema!
Although that success isn't without some irony, considering that Nintendo was also behind that other Mario movie, which famously kickstarted the live-action trend over 30 years ago as the first ever Hollywood adaptation based on the video game.
Again, it's like poetry, so if they rhyme.
Despite that fact though, the Mario movie isn't just for hardcore fans. Sure, it was undeniably made for them first and foremost, but you don't reach this level of success without attracting a much wider fan base, even with Mario's multi-generational reach. Hell, even my parents, who really only know of Mario through my own obsession with the games, went to go see it. And well, I'll let them speak for themselves.
I thought it was absolutely outstanding. I was just blown away. I loved it.
Just really a wholesome, fun, entertaining, I could go see it again movie.
Which is especially impressive when you consider just how weird Mario's universe is. I mean, this is a world of sentient mushrooms, ruled over by a human princess, featuring a lovesick Turtle King as an antagonist, with elements like flying tanuki suits, gorillas in sport coats that can drive cars, and more. Almost all of which are side effects of Nintendo's gameplay-first philosophy, where elements added for their gameplay purpose don't have to make logical sense within this world, which is why platforms can float for no discernible reason, or why a flower can let you throw fireballs. How do you even begin to make these seemingly nonsensical attributes make sense? Well, as it turns out, the secret is, you don't. Or at least not overtly. All that matters is that the characters believe it. In fact, Illumination had actually explored explaining some of the weirder elements early on, such as why did the question blocks float, before they wisely abandoned the idea.
This is why we're here. Openimg.
So with this being such a weird, wacky world, this is where the next smart decision that they made comes in. First off, shout out to Oxford Dictionary for finally adding this word literally while I was working on this video, as they define Isekai as a genre of science or fantasy fiction featuring a protagonist who is transported to a different, strange, or unfamiliar world. Some famous examples include The Wizard of Oz, Peter Pan, The Neverending Story, Chronicles of Narnia, Tron, a ton of anime, which is appropriate given the word comes from Japan, and perhaps most fittingly, Alice in Wonderland, considering that story is partially what inspired the entire Mario series in the first place, hence the whole eating food to change size thing. And this is the absolutely perfect genre for the Super Mario Bros. Movie, because it gives the viewer something to latch onto before things get totally bonkers. By having Mario and Luigi start off in the real world, it helps ground us in the familiar with characters and problems that we can relate to before things go off the wall. But beyond that, it allows us as viewers to embark on the adventure with Mario and Luigi together, and seeing this world for the first time through their eyes. Which makes Mario's reaction to all the weird stuff happening here ours too.
Do not touch that mushroom, you'll die!
And seeing him react to the seemingly nonsensical elements of the Mushroom Kingdom isn't just funny, but it helps ease us into this world as well, allowing us to better accept these strange elements by pointing out the seemingly absurdity of the new status quo.
Whoa! Okay, so these bricks are just floating here?
Which is especially important for anyone who hasn't played the games and has no idea what's going on here. Okay, quick aside, as one who grew up with Mario in the 80s and 90s, it was just nice to see the origin story that I remembered as a kid from the books and cartoons at the time, finally being recognized as Mario's origin in an official capacity. Especially since this game messed it all up. Yeah, I went there and I'm not taking it back. Also, in a metatextual sense, an isekai is a perfect fit for a movie based on a video game, with how they effectively transport us to all kinds of fantastical virtual worlds. Fitting, right? But it's also a fairly essential component to the entire story. including in some surprisingly clever ways you might have overlooked. As a quick example, consider how Princess Peach instantly forms a bond with Mario by virtue of him being the only other human she's ever seen, which adds a context to the relationship that the games have never really cared to explore. Because in hindsight, it was a little weird that they were essentially the only humans in the Mushroom Kingdom. And it helps explain why she's more willing to help out this random weirdo who just snuck into her castle, rather than, say, having him arrested on the spot. Even Bowser uses the human connection to infer a relationship between Luigi and Mario.
There's a human traveling with my fiancée. Has a mustache, just like you.
And there's far more about the Isekai premise that's needed for the story to function at all. But we're getting ahead of ourselves, because the Mario movie has no story, right?
Wrong.
Look, I'm not going to argue that this movie has a deepest story or anything, but to write it off as little more than a string of game-based set pieces, consisting of your Mario games, your Smash Bros. Games, and your Mario Kart games, is really selling it short. Because there actually is a pretty clear plot structure, with constant setups and payoffs, one of which uses all three of the aforementioned sequences to not only tell the story, but makes them an essential part of our characters' arcs. We'll talk more about that last bit soon enough, but for now, I want to quickly recap the movie's major plot points, both to make a point, but also to inform or remind you of the overall story, as I'll be referencing specific moments throughout this video. When on the verge of bankruptcy for investing their life savings into their plumbing business, Mario and Luigi finally land their first customer. But after an initial taste of success, it quickly turns into a nightmare and they return home defeated. During dinner, their family mocks their business plan, with their dad specifically blaming Mario for chasing a dream while dragging Luigi down with him. Feeling dejected and worthless, Mario catches a breaking news story about a major flood in Brooklyn, which he views as an opportunity, once again dragging Luigi with him. But they fail at fixing that too, which then leads the plumbers to a mysterious pipe, which transports them to two different regions of a mysterious new world. Luigi to the Darklands and Mario in the Mushroom Kingdom, where he then encounters Toad, who takes him to the castle to meet the princess for guidance. Once there, Mario learns that she's on her own mission to stop Bowser in order to save her kingdom, and she promises to help Mario find his brother along the way. But she'll only allow him to accompany her if he can prove his worth by passing an obstacle course, although he fails to pass the test. But impressed by his determination, she relents and allows Mario to join her anyway on her quest to find and convince a Kong army to join her. Upon arriving, the leader of the Kongs will only offer his army support if Mario can defeat his son in the Great Ring of Kong. Against all odds, Mario pulls it off. And in exchange, Cranky Kong not only keeps his promise, but also informs them that Bowser's attack on the Mushroom Kingdom is imminent, and they'll have to take a shortcut back in order to make it in time. But having learned of their plan, Bowser decides to ambush them while they're en route, which results in the entirety of the Kong army being kidnapped, Mario and Donkey Kong presumed dead, and leaving only Peach and Toad, who just barely survived, to return home and warn the citizens to evacuate the city. But Bowser isn't far behind, and when he arrives, he offers her a choice: marry him, or watch her citizens be tortured instead. Peach relents and the wedding is on. Thankfully, just before the wedding vows, Toad manages to sneak a power-up into her bouquet, allowing Peach to power up and gain the upper hand. Meanwhile, Mario and Donkey Kong, who actually didn't die by the way, despite being eaten by a giant eel, managed to return to the Mushroom Kingdom just as all this is going down. Then, Mario finds a super leaf just in time, and saves his brother from a terrible fate, just as Bowser launches one final countermeasure: a bomber build that'll completely annihilate the Mushroom Kingdom. Luckily, Mario just barely manages to distract it in time, and leads it to the same warp pipe that he first arrived from, causing it to detonate safely in the space between spaces. But this has the unintended effect of creating a vacuum, sucking everyone and everything nearby up, and transporting them back to Mario and Luigi's home of Brooklyn, New York, where the real final battle takes place, with one pissed off Bowser, who doesn't hold back. But just when Mario is on the verge of defeat, he finds it within himself to face down Bowser one more time, just before being joined by his brother, giving them the strength to grab the superstar together and putting Bowser down for good. And everyone lived happily ever after. Woo! So that sure was a lot of plot for a movie that supposedly has none. And that's even with skipping some pretty important details that we'll be getting into later. Now again, it's not the deepest or most complex story, but the main point is that there is in fact a story. One with a clear 3-act structure consisting of multiple plot points that derive from character-driven actions. This isn't just a protagonist who passively goes from scene to scene, but a character that's actively engaged with the story every step of the way. Again, I'm not saying this is exactly Shakespearean, but I hope that we can all agree that at the very least there is a story. Which when you think about it is nothing short of a miracle considering what Illumination had to work with. For almost 40 years, this is practically all the story we've ever had. The princess gets kidnapped and Mario goes to rescue her. The end. Okay, well, there was a one time when you had to rescue a different princess, and another time when there were multiple princesses. Riveting. And even with what little story there is, it barely even matters considering there's no real continuity between the games anyway, with each one pretty much taking place in a vacuum where events from prior games have almost no bearing. Which is to say, there's no real character growth to speak of. Mario's Mario, and that's that. So the fact that Illumination not only managed to scavenge anything from this, but built something out of it, completed characters that actually do grow and change, while remaining faithful to the spirit of the games, is absolutely remarkable. Particularly because they managed to pull this off without relying on the one trope that the series has depended on for 4 decades. All without it feeling like a betrayal to the source material. So how did Illumination manage to pull this off? Well, a lot of it can be explained by the narrative framework that Illumination chose to use, which if you've taken any film classes, you may have already picked up on, as it's a framework that's shared with some of the most widely beloved films of all time, including Star Wars, Harry Potter, and plenty more, as it enabled Mario to do something that he hasn't been able to across nearly 40 years worth of games. Yep, we're talking about the hero's journey. Because what is Mario if not a hero? Okay, so there's actually a lot more to the hero's journey than just being a hero. The hero's journey is a concept popularized by the writer Joseph Campbell, who recognized a common structure across a wide variety of stories. He describes it as this: a hero ventures forth from the world of common day into a region of supernatural wonder. Fabulous forces are there encountered and a decisive victory is won. The hero comes back from this mysterious adventure with the power to bestow boons on his fellow man. Alright, that might sound a little pretentious, but you can think of it as basically an Isekai with a few extra steps, specifically these 17 steps, although it's been more commonly pared down to 12 or so these days. But here's the thing.
The code is more what you'd call guidelines than actual rules.
Because not every hero's journey necessarily needs to follow these 12 steps to a T, nor necessarily in that exact order, especially when it comes to the medium of films, which often compresses or skips some steps entirely. So more to the point, these 12 steps of the hero's journey fall into 3 primary stages, which just so happens to fit pretty well within the typical 3-act structure. First, we have the departure, in which we see the hero begin in their ordinary world before somehow ending up in the other world they're unfamiliar with. It usually begins by showing the main character as being dissatisfied with something about their life. They might be bored, unfulfilled, or something else.
And if these new droids do work out, I want to transmit my application to the Academy this year.
You mean the next semester before the harvest?
Sure, there's more than enough droids.
Although this isn't always a requirement, as there are cases where the hero is content, or at least seemingly content, before something happens that forces them out of their comfort zone. But in any case, this will soon lead us to what's known as the Call to Adventure, which is an event that promises the hero something that they want. It could be an invitation from a wizarding school that promises freedom, or a secret message found in a robot that teases an exciting adventure, or some kind of traumatic event like your son being kidnapped, or even a horde of fairy tale creatures that show up on your front lawn forcing you to venture out to get rid of them. Point is, the Call to Adventure is the event or catalyst for our hero starting out on their adventure into a strange new world. And this leads us to the initiation, where once our protagonist or hero is in this strange new world, they'll encounter a series of trials and obstacles to overcome in order to find whatever it is that they're looking for. Importantly, they'll often be aided by a mentor along the way, or even several mentors, and they'll help guide them through some part of their journey. Usually it's someone older or wiser like Obi-Wan or Dumbledore, but not always. Like how Donkey acts as the mentor to Shrek, by being the first one to accept Shrek for who he really is.
I'm an ogre! You know, grab your torch and pitchforks! Doesn't that bother you?
Nope. The point of the mentor isn't just to guide our hero through the world, but more importantly, teach them something about themselves. And finally, there's the return, which is when our protagonist, victorious in their journey, returns back to their normal world, only now changed for the better thanks to the lessons that they learned by overcoming the obstacles they faced during their adventure. So the hero's journey is a broad outline that can encompass a wide variety of stories. And I want to be clear that even within this framework, there is a ton of variety. So now that we know what the hero's journey is, let's take a look at how it applies to the Super Mario Bros. Movie. And perhaps more interestingly, what might set it apart too. Okay, so of course we start in the departure phase, where we're first introduced to our primary protagonist, Mario, who seems to be a pretty ordinary guy with an entrepreneurial spirit. We can see he's generally joyful and optimistic, but is often made to feel small and powerless by the world and circumstances around him. His old boss berates and mocks him, he fails at their first plumbing job, and even his own father disapproves of him leaving a steady job to chase a dream, while holding him accountable for dragging his brother, Luigi, down with him too. And this is when we see Mario at one of his lowest points. He's broke, has little support, and ultimately feels like a failure, as brilliantly reinforced by Mario failing, yet again, at the very Nintendo game he's playing. It's a literal reflection of his inner turmoil. But just as he's seemingly on the verge of giving it all up, that's when he receives the call to adventure, in the form of a TV broadcast about a busted waterman that's flooding Brooklyn, which Mario, ever the optimist, interprets as the exact opportunity he and his brother have been looking for.
Somebody save Brooklyn!
Save Brooklyn?
Which is precisely what Mario and Luigi promised they would do in their plumbing ad.
That's why the Super Mario Brothers are here, to save Brooklyn.
Hey, no one can accuse them of false advertising if they pull it off, right? Now this is where things get a little unique by the hero's journey standard, because oftentimes, though not always, the hero initially refuses the call to adventure. Like how Luke Skywalker initially can't imagine living his home life behind.
I'm not going to Alderaan. I've got to get home. It's late. I'm in port as it is.
Even Shrek had to think twice before committing to it.
What kind of quest?
But Mario doesn't wince at all. After all, he's the one who interprets this as his destiny.
Destiny is calling!
So of course he's 100% on board. In fact, it's critical to the story that Mario doesn't refuse a call, because it ties directly into his character arc. That Mario refuses to give up. That even in his lowest moments, he can still find determination and opportunity. But that doesn't mean that there isn't a refusal here at all. Because let's not forget, this isn't the Super Mario movie, it's the Super Mario Brothers movie. And even though the story is largely centered around Mario, from a narrative viewpoint, it's actually about Mario and Luigi as brothers. So as it turns out, it's actually Luigi who denies the call, every step of the way.
Mario!
Which Luigi drives home after they fail at this latest attempt too.
I knew saving Brooklyn was a bad idea.
Come on.
While we're here, we can use a deleted scene to help inform us more of the creator's intent. Because originally, Mario was the one to express disappointment at their latest failure.
Mario, what are you talking about?
Come on, Lou. Let's go home. Hey, maybe there's still some dessert left over. If we're lucky, Uncle Tony didn't hammer all the cannolis.
But it was likely changed for a few reasons. One, it's redundant. We just saw Mario at his lowest point a few moments ago. We don't need to see it again so soon, as it would just be depressing, like kicking a dog when it's down, or kicking a dog at all even. Plus it runs counter to his entire arc. Remember, Mario doesn't give up, so in the moments when it seems like he might, they really need to be set up properly for us to believe it. Second, Luigi already provides that perspective, as we just pointed out with them being visibly hesitant before this scene, and having them effectively swap roles here is just confusing and sends mixed messages. Anyways, curious about what lies ahead in this strange area they found themselves in, the brothers continue to explore until they're both sucked up by a weird pipe and spat out into a strange new world, separating the pair into two different regions of it. And this is the inciting incident, the single event that disrupts the status quo and propels the story forward by giving our heroes a new purpose, or in screenwriting terms, a want. In Luigi's case, it's obviously to be rescued. And of course for Mario, he wants to find Luigi, and he'll spend most of the rest of the story trying to make that happen. So now that our heroes are finally in this strange new land, that leads us to the initiation, where Mario will face numerous obstacles on his journey to rescue Luigi. But he won't be doing it alone, as remember, an important part of the hero's journey is meeting a mentor figure. Now, although Toad acts as an early form of it, introducing Mario to the Mushroom Kingdom, a bit like Hagrid in Harry Potter, it's actually Princess Peach who fully assumes the role here, acting as Mario's Dumbledore, if you will. She's smart, super skilled, and as Toad even says,
she can do anything.
And we're not only told how capable she is, but we'll soon see it for ourselves too. Yeah, we've come a long way since
Mario?
Talk about an upgrade. And we'll be breaking down exactly why Peach needed a change later on. Anyways, as Mario's mentor, Peach is the one who first accepts him as a protege, but only after she tests his mettle with a real-life Kaizo level. So she's the one that first knows a spark in Mario that no one else has appreciated.
Okay, let's see what you're made of.
And will be the one who will eventually impart upon Mario the very thing he needs to understand in order to complete his journey. This is a perfect opportunity to discuss a critical part of our protagonist's arc, especially in a hero's journey story. Their want versus their need. A want is an external thing that drives our hero into action, but these characters usually need something too. Something that addresses an internal conflict the character has, which is often something about the character that they look at upon as a flaw. Luke Skywalker wants to leave his boring farm life behind to pursue greater adventures, but what he'll need is to overcome the fear and anger that'll tempt him to the dark side. Marlin in Finding Nemo wants to find his son, but what he actually needs is to learn how to let go and trust his son to live his life. And returning to the predecessor of the greatest movie of all time, Shrek wants to be left alone at his swamp, because he believes himself to be an unlovable monster. But what he actually needs is to learn that not everyone sees him that way. So we know Mario's want to find Luigi, but what is his need? What's the thing that he needs that's holding him back? Well, we know he's tired of feeling small, both in the physical sense of how he's often being picked up and thrown around like a sack of potatoes, but more importantly in the spiritual sense. In that, he feels powerless and ineffective.
Our whole lives everyone's telling us we can't do this, we can't do that. Just sick and tired of feeling so small.
And this is reinforced throughout his entire adventure. Spike towers over him while mocking him and his business.
Get this through your tiny brain, Mario. You're a joke.
His dad doesn't approve of anything Mario's doing.
I think you're nuts. You don't leave a steady job for some crazy dream.
The leader of the Kong army openly laughs at him.
Who is this guy?
Donkey Kong mocks his size.
I don't need anything special to break every bone in your tiny body.
Which is only amplified when this happens. And he's constantly insulting him too.
And well, my dad thinks I'm a joke too.
Yeah, well, your dad's right!
And even his own mentor, Princess Peach, can't help herself from making a snide remark.
You won't even notice it probably, because you're very, very small.
Hey, no body shaming, Peach. So Mario desires to feel bigger, both physically and spiritually. The physical side gets cleverly dealt with soon enough, with the mushroom power-up literally making him bigger, even if just temporarily. Look at how Mario reacts.
Whoa! I'm tall.
He's even a little cocky.
Oh, I got this. No problem.
Although he's about to learn that the power-up alone isn't going to solve his problems. Which leaves his internal need as what needs addressing, as he's tired of being made to feel ineffective. But something needs to change for that to happen. Specifically, Mario needs to embrace the idea that his determination, which has been so derided by others, isn't actually a weakness, but a source of his strength, his superpower, you might say. And that's what the entirety of the second act, the initiation, is all about. Mario facing challenges that he doesn't back away from and finding success in one way or the other.
Had enough?
Not even close.
Which allows Peach, his mentor, to open his mind to the possibility that what he believed to be true about himself actually isn't. And her role is instrumental in helping him realize this truth. Consider how it's only due to Mario's sheer determination that leads to Peach even considering bringing him along in the first place.
Make fun of me all you want, but you were gonna help me find my brother. Please?
Well, okay.
But even then, not before putting him to the test in what's basically Mushroom Kingdom boot camp. And Mario isn't even able to finish it in time. Yet Peach still brings him along anyway.
We have a long journey ahead of us, Mustache.
But I didn't make it.
Exactly, Mario! Why is Peach bringing you along if you couldn't finish a course? Here's the thing, she wasn't actually testing his ability to complete the course. What she actually was testing was his resolve.
Well, okay. Let's see what you're made of.
Is that a yes?
No, that's a let's see what you're made of.
And he passed that test with flying colors because he never gave up. So the seed of a new belief has been planted, but now it needs to be watered and nurtured. And that's where the next major test comes in, where Mario takes on DK and gets completely clobbered in return. Because despite getting the snot beat out of him, he just keeps at it.
Had enough?
Not even close.
And eventually succeeds as a result. Afterward, Peach tells him one of the most important things that he needs to hear.
You just don't know when to quit!
Huh, well, never thought of that as a good thing.
It's a great thing.
Thanks.
In this conversation, she's directly addressing the lie that Mario believes about himself. The one that's been reinforced by his dad, Spike, and even the circumstance that he and Luigi find themselves in. Specifically, that his determination isn't something to be proud of. But Mario's mind is now being open to the realization that it might actually be a good thing. And that's his true reward in this case. I mean, sure, he's won the favor of the Kong army, and that'll definitely help in a brute force sense, but what he'll need for later, as well as his own personal fulfillment, is the exact thing he just learned. But that newfound belief will be tested soon enough. because Mario still has more challenges to face, including one where he finds himself at a new lowest point, literally on the ocean floor, inside a giant eel being slowly eaten alive, which perhaps is appropriate considering he and DK briefly bond over shared trauma that's eating both of them up inside too, including the revelation that Mario's blaming himself for the predicament that Luigi finds himself in.
Well, at least your brother isn't gonna die because of you.
Which is when it's become clear how much he's internalized what his dad's told him.
And the worst part? You're bringing your brother down with you.
And what my dad thinks I'm a joke too.
Quick aside, but I have to bring attention to the fact that one of the steps in Joseph Campbell's outline for the hero's journey is literally titled The Belly of the Whale, which is all too fitting for where we find ourselves now, inside the belly of an eel. Now, strictly speaking, the step Joseph described usually happened much earlier in the story, generally as a low point for the hero right before they venture out into the new world, which in this movie's case would likely be this scene, right before Mario receives the call to adventure. However, it's also become more commonly known for representing the hero's lowest point, and even though this may be a new low for Mario, we're not quite at his lowest yet. In any case, between DK's ingenuity and Mario's determination, they both eventually make it back to the Mushroom Kingdom, where Mario rescues Luigi, diverts a bomber build that threatened the entire kingdom, and basically saves the day. Except, it's not over yet, because his action causes them all to be warped back to his original world, Brooklyn, New York. Which, at least in a literal sense, brings us to the final part of the hero's journey, the return. I say that because, although Mario may physically be back in his home world, his journey isn't quite over yet, as his problem kind of followed him here. Whoops! And this is where Mario will face his final test, because Bowser is pissed, and wants to make Mario as miserable as he is.
Now you will suffer! Like me!
And he doesn't hold back, pummeling the poor plumber into near total submission. Even though we end up back where we started in the pizza parlor, things couldn't be more different. Rather than celebrating with his brother, Mario's beaten up and all alone, unsure of everything that led up to this moment. Despite all the success he's seen during his journey, it all seems to be for naught, as it's only turned into a bigger problem, and he's back to feeling like a failure. When he looks upon himself, he only sees a broken man. But just when he's on the verge of giving up, he receives a message when he needs it most. And it's a message from himself, along with his brother.
Mamma mia! That's why the Super Mario Brothers are here, to save Brooklyn.
And it reminds him of who he is and what their true purpose is. This is a wonderful scene, and I don't think it gets nearly enough credit for how well done it is, as it makes Mario feel vulnerable for basically the first time ever, and we truly do believe he's on the cusp of giving up. The movie doesn't undercut it with a joke or a visual gag. It actually does slow down and let us linger for a moment with Mario's deep contemplation, before following it with a heartfelt message that Mario needed to hear at his lowest point. And when Mario finally ventures back outside to face Bowser one more time, not only is it incredibly resonant, but that's when we get the payoff to the entire journey Mario's been on, both physically and spiritually.
You just don't know when to quit.
Yeah, I've been told that before.
That is the lesson that Mario needed to learn. The validation that Peach gave him earlier was a gift he needed to keep going before he abandoned that belief forever. He's finally truly embraced the idea that his determination is a source of strength and not a weakness, and combined with being reminded of everything that's important to him, gave him the strength and courage he needed to see this through to the end.
Let's go.
From this point, it almost doesn't even matter what happens next. Mario's character arc is essentially complete. Except for one important detail. Because remember, this is not the Super Mario movie. And what happens next in this sequence also brings closure to Luigi's arc too. But let's back up a little bit, because we've been neglecting poor Luigi. Granted, the guy's been stuck in a cage for a lot of the movie, but he actually does have an arc here too. It's just not as pronounced or given as much attention as Mario's is. Consider how almost every time we've seen Luigi, it feels like he's a few split mustache hairs away from a full-blown panic attack. Because even though we don't get much dialogue from Luigi as to his state of mind, the way he reacts throughout the movie says more than his words ever could. As we see Luigi time and time again either scared, anxious, or nervous about anything that doesn't go exactly to plan. Whether it's a balled up napkin, being late,
Oh no, we're gonna be late.
pedestrians, mild rule breaking,
Mario, what are you doing?
fluffy pets, and even adorable suicidal stars. Okay, maybe that last one's completely fair. But it's not just that he's scared. It's more that the act of being scared is what gets him into trouble. Do you remember that cat attack earlier in the movie? That only happens because Luigi accidentally runs into the garbage can where the cat is staying as a result of being scared by the pedestrian crossing the street. And then there's a whole Francis thing, which only became a problem because Luigi accidentally stepped on his bone, breaking it, as a result of being distracted and scared by Francis. For comparison's sake, Mario completely sidesteps a bone because he's not scared and distracted. And then Luigi only gets himself kidnapped in the first place because he ran away in fear instead of, you know, taking the warp pipe behind him right back home. Being scared isn't just a character trait of Luigi. It seems to be an active hindrance in his life. To the point that at the very end, he's willing to hide inside a filthy garbage can like a scaredy cat rather than confront his fear. But then he reaches a turning point, when he sees Mario facing down Bowser, even after everything they've been through. And that's when Luigi discovers the truth about himself. That courage isn't the absence of fear, but finding the strength to act in spite of it. And that's what helps him literally emerge from the shadows to finally become the person he's always wanted to be. Finally, reunited at last with both of their arcs complete, Mario and Luigi can truly become the Super Mario Brothers, where nothing can hurt them, in a truer sense than either possibly imagined. As further evidence of Luigi's arc, his heroic act of using a manhole cover to protect Mario from Bowser's flames mirrors an earlier scene. Literally, when Luigi reflexively holds a round mirror up to fight back a torrent of water. Exactly as he's doing now with a manhole cover to keep Bowser's fire at bay. Only this time it's very intentional instead of reactionary, and seemingly without fear. Finally, with Bowser defeated and Brooklyn saved, Mario is unquestionably a hero due to his perseverance, and finally gets the approval he's been seeking. Not just from his dad and his former boss, but the entire city block, which vindicates a lesson that he learned in the Mushroom Kingdom, that his determination isn't something to be ashamed of. And even though Peach wasn't able to mentor Luigi in the same way, that doesn't stop her from acknowledging his heroic act too.
And Luigi, you're so brave.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, it's kind of my thing.
And that comment he made is the exact opposite of what he said at the start of the film.
Luigi, come on. You can't be scared all the time.
You'd be surprised.
So it's kinda sweet that Peach only knows Luigi as the brave individual that he just became. All of this is so incredibly heartfelt, and it includes a positive message. That the act of failing doesn't make you a failure. Instead, it's a stepping stone in your journey to be learned from rather than used as a sign to give up entirely. And this is further cemented when we see Mario and Luigi continuing to run their plumbing business, only presumably much more successfully now. I suppose that literally saving Brooklyn's probably a pretty good advertisement. Only now, the twist is that they run out of the Mushroom Kingdom, which is a fun take on a typical hero's journey ending, which normally results in the hero returning to their normal world. But here, they've instead made the strange world their new home instead. Although it's clearly implied they can still return to their original home to take advantage of everything that they've gained and learned. Woo! And that brings us to the end of the hero's journey. Or should I say, hero's journey. Not bad for a pair of plumbers, huh? So after going through all of this, I hope that I've shown, at the least, there's more story and character development here than some have given it credit for. Now sure, it's not the most complicated story in the world, nor the deepest character study, but it's also not the brain-dead A to B story that's been portrayed as, featuring a static protagonist who doesn't change or gain anything of value from their journey. So why does it often get labeled this way? Well, at least some of this perception, if not most of it, is almost certainly due to the admittedly quick pace. This movie moves. The ingredients are all there, but it doesn't spend any longer cooking them than it needs to. It's ruthlessly efficient, which admittedly doesn't leave a whole lot of time for things to settle in before whisking us to the next part of the journey, which can be especially disorienting upon the first viewing, as nearly every scene introduces some kind of new element. Heck, I even had some similar comments upon my first viewing. The movie does have a breakneck pace, which isn't necessarily a negative, but there were a few times where I'm like, I wish you would let this breathe a little bit more. But then a funny thing happened. I watched it again, and nearly every complaint I had completely melted away, as the time spent on each scene just felt right. The story has a constant sense of forward momentum, with clear character-driven goals, and it never once leaves you feeling like it's spinning its wheels. From how it immediately sets up the villain and the overall threat that he poses in the very first scene, to how it effortlessly ties together Mario and Peach's separate motivations into a common goal, being to stop Bowser in order to rescue Luigi and save the Mushroom Kingdom respectively. Every major step needed along that path is purposefully explained in advance, so you're never left wondering what the point of it all is. The story is truly conveyed effortlessly, and that might partially explain why it feels so brisk, because the movie's doing a lot of work without feeling like it. Take, for example, just how efficient the opening few minutes of the movie are in setting up the story, world, and characters, as the movie immediately makes clear the threat that Bowser poses with his massive airship, giant army, and capability to melt an entire kingdom, as he lays claim to the item he was after, the superstar, or Chekhov's star in this case, as it'll come back into play at the very end of the movie. Bowser even teases its capability.
No one can stop me!
So it won't come as a complete surprise later on for anyone unfamiliar with the games. Then immediately following the opening scene, we're introduced to our heroes, Mario and Luigi, but by way of a commercial for their plumbing business, which communicates so much with so little, while being a ton of fun in the process. Not only does it seamlessly convey their wants and self-driven nature of starting a business, which is an especially important part of Mario's character arc, but it also communicates just how broke they are, with the amateurish acting.
It seems like the only thing you haven't drained is my bank account.
Cheap effects, including how you can see Mario and Luigi simply crouching before they pop into view here, or even how there's visible green screen edges and reflections from poor lighting, which obviously isn't a problem that I have, on top of mistakes left in the final edit. Nice save there, Luigi. All of which lines up with a statement that Mario's about to make.
I am so glad we spent our life savings on this commercial.
The brothers clearly don't come from money, which is further reinforced when we later see that they both live at home and share a room in a packed house, on top of driving this hunk of junk around, or try to anyway. Which, side note, is such a great reason to justify this early platforming scene that is both a fun callback to the games, while giving us an early glimpse into Mario's more agile side. And that's not even to mention how the commercial also foreshadows the movie's climactic third act.
That's why the Super Mario Brothers are here to save Brooklyn and the Queen.
And even how everyone comes together as a family at the end.
With the Super Mario Brothers, your family.
And then, of course, there's the fact that the ad comes back at the most critical point in the film. This one commercial is putting in overtime with how much it accomplishes. And that cheap ad, combined with the brothers' cute reactions to it, instantly make the two incredibly likable. Not just with how proud they are of their modest accomplishment, but also how much they love and support each other, and how far they'll go to try and make their dreams happen, despite life finding a way to keep them down. Which is exactly why Spike enters the scene right here, to thwart them the exact moment they're feeling good about themselves, calling them
the Stupid Mario Brothers.
Idiot.
And
a joke.
While also setting up how small Mario feels, physically and mentally, along with Luigi's scaredy-cat demeanor.
He's 3 times your size. Luigi, come on. You can't be scared all the time.
You'd be surprised.
Both of which play vital roles in their respective story arcs. All the while giving us more context about this world, and also doubling as a deep cut to Mario's real-world gaming past. So in just 5 minutes, we've learned about the immense threat that Bowser and the Superstar pose, along with who Mario and Luigi are, including their personal ambitions and their place in the world, at least as perceived by people like Spike, while also setting up their insecurities of feeling powerless or being scared. Say what you will about the overall plot, but this is remarkably efficient storytelling, which might lend to the overall quick feel. But another reason for that might be how the movie masterfully transitions scene to scene, even when cutting between 2 or 3 different groups of people in entirely different locations, by smartly setting up what's going to come next. Like when Bowser says this,
and now no one can stop me!
It immediately cuts to the people who will, in fact, stop him. Similarly, when Peach says,
I'll never let anyone ruin this.
It then cuts to the person she's talking about, who, incidentally, just so happens to be singing about her, while floating in what appears to be a star-filled backdrop, which is all too fitting considering what happens in the next scene.
There's a huge universe out there, with a lot of galaxies.
And then in this instance, one character calls for another,
Mario,
before the scene fades away to focus on the other character, which is used to great effect in the specific case, as it highlights the trapped nature of both Luigi and Mario. Then, as Mario and DK make their escape, the movie seamlessly cuts to their destination in order to showcase Peach's perspective, with the focus on the sky helping to connect the 2 shots. And once Peach begins her assault on the wedding, a hard cut to that same action but from a distance helps to bridge another perspective shift back to Mario and DK, as we return to their struggles. Then we shift back to Peach again, just as they begin their ascent toward the battlefield, which perfectly sets the scene for when DK and Mario come to the rescue. Look, I could keep going for a while, but the point is that the movie is doing far more than it gets credit for to ensure a constant sense of forward progression. And it's really only when rewatching the movie, free of being distracted by the novelty of it all, that the pacing begins to feel reasonable. But another reason why it works so well upon a second viewing is the realization of how every single action sequence isn't there just for the sake of being fun, but is an integral part of the story, and more importantly, Mario's character arc. The training montage is needed not just to acquaint Mario with the skills he needs for this world, but also sets up his perseverance as an important character trait. Then the Donkey Kong battle, which ostensibly is about proving his worth to earn the favor of the Kong army, is really more about Mario learning that his desire to just keep on going is actually a good thing. And then we have the Mario Kart scene, which of course is needed from a story perspective to get our heroes back to where they need to be, but is also about Mario failing once again despite his perseverance, leading him to his lowest point yet, which is when he begins to start doubting himself again, especially for putting Luigi's life at risk too. Which is what ultimately makes this moment during the final battle all the more powerful. With Mario now at his true lowest point, where in spite of everything he's done and the successes he seemed to have, it not only hasn't been enough, it's arguably only made things worse.
And the worst part? You're bringing your brother down with you.
It practically takes a divine intervention to remind him of his true self and break him free of the lie he started to believe. Not bad for a video game series that for 40 years has had almost no story to speak of. But on that note, in a more meta-adaptation sense, this is a pretty brilliant way of incorporating the real-life narrative that anyone who's played a Mario game has had, where it's only through enduring failure after failure can you finally succeed in the end. Who knew there was a good life lesson hiding in those games all this time? It only took the Mario movie to find it. I truly don't understand how, after all of this, anyone could seriously accuse this movie of being little more than an Easter egg fest. Look, I'm not saying that there aren't a ton of recognizable Mario elements hidden all throughout the movie, even if I do get the sense that some people consider that world building in some other series, but my point more is that nearly every Easter egg here fits organically within the context of the world without calling attention to itself, in the sense that it works for the story whether you recognize it as a reference or not. You don't need to know that that's a GameCube startup sound to know that Luigi's phone is ringing. It's entirely possible to enjoy the Mario movie without recognizing a single reference. Once again, I offer my parents as proof. Did you ever feel lost at any point or confused about why something was happening the way it was? Or
No. I thought the movie, listen, I mean, it was flawless.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Bottom line, flawless.
Yeah.
I saw it. To me, zero errors in this movie. Zero.
In fact, some of the ways in which the Easter eggs are incorporated into this story is nothing short of brilliant. Let's take Mario and Luigi's plumbing commercial for example.
We're the Mario Brothers and plumbing's a game.
On the surface, it seems to be just a fun reference to the Super Mario Bros. Super Show, a cartoon that many of us grew up with. Yet at the same time, it seamlessly sets up our main characters, hints at their wants and desires,
To save Brooklyn. And the Queen.
ties it into Mario's character arc,
I am so glad we spent our life savings on this commercial.
and then brings it back as an essential part of the movie's climax. Once again,
That is not a commercial. That is cinema.
it's just brilliant. So regardless of whether you're familiar with the source material or not, the story works. And I think a big part of that is how efficient the movie is with that storytelling. Not just through the dialogue, but how it communicates through the visuals and action sequences too. Even again, for those who have no idea who these characters are. And that's in large part thanks to some important changes that Nintendo and Illumination made to the characters' roles to fit better within the story. Even though Mario's body made the leap into 3D decades ago, his personality has remained as flat as ever. The only thing you could really tell about him from playing the games is that he's a pretty normal dude that's just having a good time while rescuing princesses. He rarely expresses any emotion beyond sheer joy, besides maybe occasional surprise and mild irritation. And you know what? I still loved him for it. Not every game character needs to be rooted in some deep-seated insecurity, right?
No.
Especially when the Mario games are all about having fun, which doesn't lend itself particularly well to a medium that's all about characterization. Yet, Illumination managed to capture the essence of that 2D caricature while changing him for the better by fleshing out his personality into that of an actual human being. As in, someone with wants and needs and emotions, as we've already broken down. A person who isn't just yelling Yahoo! Every chance that he gets, but one who reacts realistically to his environment. He gets upset, sad, scared, uncertain, depressed, and more. Mario is far more reactive here than he's ever been portrayed in the games, or anywhere for that matter. But one of the few clear traits that Mario has always had is that he's a friendly, outgoing guy. And I love how Illumination managed to fit this element in while allowing him to behave more realistically too. Like how he feels the need to greet almost everyone he meets. Whether it's saying hello to the bramble early on, or waving to this toad, or this gorilla in a sports coat, or an entire Kong army, or even a freaking nuclear missile. Hell, even when he's feeling overwhelmed by this crazy mushroom town and literally everyone is staring at him out of curiosity, he still manages to make things right. Like handing this drop coin back to a shocked toad. Let's just ignore it's actually a totally different toad that dropped the coin. It's a small detail, but it goes a long way in showing who Mario is. Someone who cares about others. Yet, despite being friendly, Mario isn't a pushover here, and he even has some edge to him. He stands up to Spike and Luigi's behalf without a second thought, and threatens to fight DK for getting on his nerves, which even carries over into the next scene. So while Illumination doesn't do anything too crazy with Mario, they definitely pushed him farther as a character than they could have. And it's easy to see how the movie could have easily fallen apart had Nintendo not allowed as much freedom as they have. I mean, they even gave Mario an entire family, including some daddy-related issues. Could you imagine Disney doing that with Mickey Mouse in a major motion picture? No! I also appreciate that the movie returns to the idea of Mario originally being from our world and not the Mushroom Kingdom, because it reinforces the notion that Mario isn't your typical superhero. In fact, he isn't really one at all. He wasn't bitten by a radioactive spider, or is the chosen one, nor is he a moonlighting billionaire. He's just a completely normal blue-collar guy who rises to the occasion when needed, with his only superpower being his sheer will of determination. And that doesn't just ground Mario as a character, but makes his journey and the lessons to be taken from it more relatable. And that's why what I'm about to say might have sounded insane before the movie came out. And that is, Chris Pratt is perfectly cast as Mario. His performance brought both the warmth and everyman quality to the character that the role demanded, which actually makes a lot of sense considering Chris Pratt seems to excel at that archetype. From the lovable office dweeb in Parks and Rec, to a shockingly relatable superhero in Guardians of the Galaxy, to an ordinary guy faced with a moral dilemma in Passengers. In fact, here's a producer for Passengers on why they chose Chris Pratt for the role.
Chris just has such a warmth and such a humorous side of him that he gives you this everyman feel going through this experience.
And sure enough, those are the same qualities that perfectly befit Mario in the movie, because he isn't yet the confident hero we know from the games, yipping and yelling in the face of danger, but instead is just an ordinary guy in an extraordinary situation.
How am I supposed to do that?
He nails the role so well that's personally hard for me to imagine Mario sounding any other way in the movie now. And I say this as one who adores Charles Martinet's more whimsical take on Mario in the games. But with the film demanding a younger, more nuanced take, Chris Pratt pulled off the nearly impossible task of bridging what we knew of Mario from the games with where he needed to be for the movie.
Really?
And I also love how the movie addresses initially divisive change head on, in a way that's both hilarious and ridiculously clever, all by having this guy, who just so happens to resemble Mario from his very first appearance in 1981's Donkey Kong, and is actually voiced by Mario's original voice actor Charles Martinet, agreeing that Mario's exaggerated accent in the commercial,
Mamma mia!
which sounds just like Mario in the games, is actually perfect.
Is it too much? Too much? It's perfect! Wahoo!
It's very charming! And that's not even to mention how Charles Martinet also voices Mario's dad in the movie, making him the literal father of Mario, which is just a really sweet way of paying tribute to a beloved performer of over 30 years. Furthermore, I absolutely love how they portray the relationship between Mario and Luigi. They're never jealous or spiteful of each other, but genuinely love and support one another. Listen to the first words we literally hear them say to each other.
Wow, you were great! I was great! Are you kidding me? You were great!
And at every step, Mario is always there standing up for Luigi, whether against Spike, Francis, or even other babies. But whereas Mario is Luigi's physical protector, Luigi is there for Mario emotionally.
You're not bringing me down.
While coolly offering him a plate of food that Mario had walked away from. We believe they miss each other because it's established how close they are and what they mean to one another, which makes the reunion at the end all the more heartfelt, both times it happens. And it's just really nice to see a positive sibling portrayal. And that's why I appreciate that the movie keeps Mario's focus squarely on rescuing Luigi, rather than trying to shoehorn in a love story. And that brings us to one of the most important changes that Illumination made to the overall narrative, making Luigi the damsel in distress. Yeah, you heard me! Okay, what I actually mean by that is having the princess as the main goal, or Mario's want, just wouldn't work here. And not just because it's a boring, tired trope, but more because it doesn't really make any sense for an Isekai type story. After all, what incentive would Mario and Luigi have to even rescue someone they only just met? if they even met them. They would have zero personal connection to Princess Peach, and would barely even know who she is.
Princess?
Besides whatever fluttery, romantic nonsense the movie can try and squeeze in before then to convince us of why she matters at all. Which, as it turns out, is exactly what the original Mario movie tried to do, where Mario and Luigi only briefly met with the princess before having to rescue her. All because Luigi had a silly crush on her or something? Okay, to be fair, maybe they wanted to rescue her out of the goodness of their hearts too. But somehow I don't think Luigi would have made the same choice if she looked like this. So why should we, as the audience, care about the character's goals if they have almost no reason to care themselves? And sure enough, in that case, audiences didn't care. And that would especially be a problem when it came to the hero's journey. Because as we've said ad nauseum by now, Mario as a character needs a want. And trying to rescue someone that he has no connection to otherwise isn't especially compelling. Which is why having Luigi filling in for that typical princess role is an infinitely stronger choice. He's someone that we know Mario is close to and cares deeply about. So taking him away is one of the strongest motives Mario could possibly have. And that's a great want. Now, one of the side effects, of course, is it did sideline Luigi for a fair amount of the movie, and I know a lot of you wanted to see even more of him working alongside Mario. But here's the thing, Luigi needed to be taken out of the picture for Mario's arc to work. We already know that Luigi is one of the few supportive people in Mario's life, and Mario needed to be stripped of that. That's kind of the point of an Isekai, to pull a character out of their comfort zone, to be the fish out of water. Having someone you know deeply and trust accompany you on the entire adventure would undermine the entire point, especially if the two of you, when together, truly believe that nothing can hurt you. There would be no real sense of danger or room for self-doubt. And that would have made for a very satisfying hero's journey, now would it? As it would have deprived both Mario and Luigi of the arcs they have here, and the emotional impact that comes from them both reuniting in the end. So now that we understand why Luigi needed to be the one captured to be Mario's want in this hero's journey, let's explore the other major change, being how Peach's place in this story suddenly falls into place. Changing Peach from a typical damsel in distress to a mentor-like figure is one of the boldest and best things the movie could have possibly done. And not just because it subverts your expectations by going against nearly 40 years of Mario games, but more because it was the best decision from a character and story perspective. I've even heard some people say that this is more Princess Peach's movie than it is Mario's. And while I don't really agree with that, given I just talked for like 30 minutes about how it's Mario and Luigi's story, the fact that's even a takeaway someone could have speaks volumes about how far she's come, from being little more than just a love interest and helpless victim. Consider this. Peach has always inexplicably been a human. As in, the only human who rules over a land of mushroom people. What? This is one of the few points that couldn't be hand-waved away in the movie, which is why the movie finally gives her a proper backstory, explaining she accidentally traveled to the kingdom as a baby before eventually being entrusted as the ruler of the kingdom. So of course she'd be proficient at surviving this world, having grown up in it all these years. And having her be a helpless victim would defy that logic entirely. After all, why would the Toads entrust her as their leader if she can't even protect herself? And from that premise, a stronger, more assertive personality type naturally follows, rather than the more reserved and arguably helpless Peach we see in the mainline games. And now that we have a more proactive Peach freed of the role of being kidnappee, having her assume the role of Mario's mentor is straight up galaxy brain. Not only does it make perfect sense to the story, but it's a fun twist on an age-old formula that we thought we knew from the games, while also giving Mario and Peach a stronger foundation on which the relationship can be built upon in the sequels, which is smartly only lightly teased throughout this one. Which is exactly why it was a wise move to cut this short scene from the film.
You know, when we're done with all of this, I thought maybe you could come visit Brooklyn. I could show you around.
Because while it is cute on the surface, it ends up making Mario feel distracted from his core mission, which he had just been talking about seconds before.
We've never been apart this long.
Plus, the scene is made redundant by a much more fitting scene about 20 minutes later.
What are you gonna tell me next? That the turtles aren't evil?
No, they're usually pets.
No way.
Come to Brooklyn, I'll buy you a turtle.
And that's not to say that the movie ignores the love interest entirely, but it wisely pushes it to the background for now, leaving plenty of room for a sequel to explore. Furthermore, this version of Peach helps brings unity to a weird disparity the series has always had involving her, where at most times she's portrayed as weak and useless whenever the mainline stories demanded it. Though at other times she's just as capable as anyone else, going as far back as the very first sequel to Super Mario Bros. So why is she the only one to ever get kidnapped? So really, the movie finally portrays Peach in a coherent and logically consistent fashion, rather than the purely fairy tale logic of the games. Finally, this change makes for a better villain too, as it allows Bowser to be an active antagonist in the story with a clear goal: marry Princess Peach in a fairy tale wedding. while stopping Mario to ensure that that happens. Consider how the story could have played out instead if it stuck closer to the games, where instead of finding the superstar at the beginning, he actually kidnapped Peach right away. What would Bowser's role even be then? He's already attained his own want, and wouldn't really have anything to do until Mario finally challenges him. Now, I'm sure there are ways in which you could make it work, and perhaps you'll see something like that in a sequel, but it would fundamentally be a very different movie. Plus, had they gone that route, we wouldn't have gotten this amazing take on Disney's typical I Want song.
Peaches, 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 peaches.
I didn't want to make a whole section about it or anything, but I really love how they portray Bowser here. On the one hand, being surprisingly endearing at times, even through his reckless actions, but without ever compromising the actual threat that he poses this time. In fact, it makes him scarier. I mean, this is a guy willing to sacrifice dozens of innocents as part of his fairy tale wedding. Bowser actually feels intimidating, as if he could fly off the handle at any point. He's clearly a force to be reckoned with, especially toward the end when he's acting entirely out of spite and vengeance, which makes Mario's reaction to standing up to him feel all the more powerful. Speaking of this amazing song, it's time to finally address the issue I mentioned way back when.
What?
We have to talk about the music. Okay, let's circle back to that one possible concession that I mentioned forever ago at this point. And it's a complaint I've heard a lot, perhaps the most of any, that there's too much licensed music. And every time I hear this complaint, it leaves me wondering, did we watch the same movie? Music from the Mario games is literally all over the place. From the very opening of the film, to Mario's tour of the Mushroom Kingdom, to Luigi stumbling around the Darklands, to Rainbow Road, to even the freaking climax. Look, I could be here all day pointing out the many musical references, but the point is there are a ton of them, and they're all amazing. Let's compare that to the Sonic movie, which had...
Yes, Mr.
Need any more?
Manager, you get that boy.
Excuse me, I didn't catch that.
Yeah, that was it! If your ears could blink, you might have missed it. Even Sonic Movie 3, which comparatively has quite a bit more, still ends up feeling pretty lacking in this department. In comparison to just about every other video game movie adaptation, the Mario movie is a cornucopia of Mario melodies, which is pretty incredible in its own right. So it's weird to me that somehow become such a common complaint, especially given the fact there's only 12 minutes of licensed music in the entire movie. Yeah, I added it up. 12 measly minutes out of an 83-minute film.
So bold!
But guess what? I lied. It's not nearly that much. About half, in fact, being 6 minutes and 4 seconds. And that's even including this track, which does that even count considering it's from 1863? So if we exclude that one, there's only 5 minutes of modern non-Mario music in the entire film. Now, some might say that's still 5 minutes too much, but I'd actually argue it's 5 minutes perfectly spent. Because first of all, it's not like these tracks come completely out of the blue. Mario is a human from our world after all, and using music we're familiar with can be a fun way of contrasting and highlighting the absurdity of the world he finds himself in. And the fact that almost all of those songs are from the 80s and 90s is a fun connection to a time period that many of us remember playing the Mario games in.
And the music! The music all through the whole thing.
The music, bringing in like AC/DC for when I'm going to write.
So really, on a base level, the licensed tracks here make way more sense than those in another animated movie you may have heard of. Which isn't to say that Shrek didn't have a brilliant soundtrack, because it did, and served as an amazing contrast to the Disney films it was parodying. But at the same time, thematically they make no sense in this universe. Whereas here, Mario is the direct connection. But more important than that is the fact that the presence of songs with actual lyrics adds a fun, unique energy that instrumentals alone can't quite match. And they are absolutely perfect for the dialogue-free sequences that they're always used in. Plus, we've heard the series music accompany Mario for nearly 40 years. Occasionally using something other than those feels special for a theatrical release.
It belongs in a movie theater.
Playing Take On Me for this go-kart sequence adds a perfect amount of levity to the scene, underscoring the complete absurdity of it all. If we compare it to the original track written for this scene, Driving Me Bananas, which, let me be clear, is fantastic in its own right, it just feels like it's missing something. It feels more atmospheric, which isn't the right energy for this scene, and is not as funny or entertaining as a result. Like watching a sitcom without the laugh track.
You just cuffed yourself a soup.
How dare you? And Jerry, we're leaving.
And it doesn't hurt that the music video for this song actually began with a racing scene, which helps it fit thematically. Furthermore, as the lead singer of the song describes, the song is about being willing to take a risk for love. It's about daring to expose yourself and be vulnerable. It's about not giving up on your dreams. And doesn't that describe Mario to a T? Who's not only having doubts about his dreams, but just so happens to be in a car with a potential love interest, taking risks to find the brother that he loves.
Again, it's like poetry, so if they rhyme.
And it fits almost as well as holding up our hero does in the training montage. Because first, it's a total banger of a song. And second, it was practically written specifically to be lighthearted and underscore ridiculous scenes, as masterfully used in the best movie of all time, and prior to that, the second best movie of all time. What's up with these two movies? But it's more than just that. And on a topmost level, it fits thematically in representing both Princess Peach, who's helping to train a hero, as well as Luigi, who needs a hero. But the lyrics also fit far better than you might think, as in, they're literally perfect. Streetwise Hercules is exactly who Mario is, or at least will be eventually. Because by streetwise, she's describing someone who knows how to handle themselves in a variety of life situations, which Mario's already demonstrated multiple times. And Hercules refers to someone physically strong, which thanks to the mushroom power-up, Mario literally is.
Whoa! I'm tall.
And strong.
And continuing off that, once again, the mushroom connection cannot be clearer. Then when she sings, at the exact moment that we see Peach has now fallen asleep, presumably dreaming of Mario's success. And did you catch how the scene cut right at that second line? Just as Mario is looking at the goal, the seemingly unattainable thing he's figuratively dreaming of right now. Meaning that line is pulling double duty, representing both Mario's figurative dream and Peach's literal dream. And then when we hear this a few seconds later, is exactly when Peach wakes up to the morning dawn. Honestly, this might give Shrek 2 a run for its money as to how well the song literally fits. So with the two most prominent licensed tracks out of the way, I'll touch only briefly on the remainder of the licensed tracks in the soundtrack. The song No Sleep Till Brooklyn is obviously near perfect given it's literally about running through Brooklyn as Mario and Luigi are doing right now, and specifically in the sense that the song is all about not resting until they reach their destination, which is pretty much Mario's thing. And come on, AC/DC's Thunderstruck to underscore a Mario Kart scene? Do I really have to explain it? And finally, Mr. Blue Sky's lyrics, which describes the clear weather, perfectly encapsulates a happier place that Mario and Luigi both find themselves in at the very end. So whether or not you like the music choices, I think you'll agree that the choices are at the least pretty clever. And speaking of which, there are a lot of clever things in the Super Mario Bros. Movie, and it doesn't get nearly enough credit for how smart it can be, with how it coagulates decades of Mario lore in a way that makes sense, or how plot points are smartly set up in advance that pay off in spades later, or even how multiple events are suddenly teased or foreshadowed completely seamlessly while fitting into the overall character's arc. As an example of how the movie makes sense of Mario's convoluted lore, having the Kongs be literal grease monkeys was nothing short of a stroke of genius. And not just for the visual pun, but more because of how it allowed the movie to incorporate the high-speed twists and turns action of the game's infamous minecart sequences within a context that actually makes sense of the world represented, while also giving an actual narrative reason for the very idea of Mario Kart's existence, which the games had never much cared to justify themselves. And then tying it all into a Mad Max-style chase was just... comedy-wise, I can't believe we've gone well over an hour without talking about Luma Lee, the literal star of the show.
Time, like hope, is an illusion.
On the surface, his hilariously dark demeanor stands in stark contrast to the adorable smiling veneer he puts on. But for hardcore Mario fans, the joke goes even deeper, as it makes perfect sense within this universe, pun intended, because Luma Lee is a Luma, a species whose entire purpose is to transform permanently into other celestial bodies, like planets and stars. Meaning this star doesn't exactly have a death wish so much as it wants to fulfill its true purpose. Next, Mario hating mushrooms is not only deliciously ironic and a pretty funny twist on nearly 40 years of game knowledge, but it also ties into his character arc, because to fulfill his physical need, to become big and strong, he has to embrace the very thing he hates, mushrooms, just like how he ends up having to do the same thing for his internal need too, which is to embrace the very thing he never thought of as
a great thing.
Did you catch how the Francis fight foreshadows at least 3 events in the movie? Now, we already covered the mirror's connection with the manhole, but the way in which Mario distracts the bomber Bill is a direct callback to this Francis fight, where when Mario's trying to distract him to get him off Luigi, he desperately searches around him to find something to distract him with, just as Mario ends up looking around at the bomber Bill before realizing his tail can serve that same purpose. Furthermore, in both cases, it ends up drawing the character's attention, which is exactly what Mario wanted, but then it puts the focus squarely on him. And as it turns out, he ends up dodging them both in the same way, flipping over them as they go underneath. And it ends up trapping them in both cases, one in the shower, the other in the warp zone. But the difference is, where it was more of a reflex with Francis, it was a deliberate effort to foil the bomber Bill, which showed Mario's increased confidence and skill. Speaking of parallels, we can see that the training montage is also reflected in the final battle, because the way Peach ends up kicking Bowser is the exact same way she did the cardboard cutout in the training sequence. Yeah, she's been training for that moment her whole life. Similarly, Mario bounces off a volley of bullet bills in the exact same way both times. And just before getting eaten by a piranha plant. Both times. Which isn't just funny, but it shows his growth too, as the second time it happens, it doesn't stop him. Finally, Bowser's fate in the movie is almost too poetic. 3 times over, because the way in which Peach initially deals with him, by freezing a fire-breathing turtle in place, is a complete inversion of how the movie began, with Bowser using his fire breath to melt an ice kingdom. From the very beginning, this was set up as a battle of fire versus ice.
Again, it's like poetry, so if they rhyme.
Second is when Peach shoves a mini mushroom down his throat, making him shrink. And not just because of how it cleverly ties into a line from earlier.
Told you I'd get you a pet turtle.
Which is already a cute touch, but also how it makes Bowser both small and powerless, which were the exact 2 things that Mario hated about himself. And that it's all because of a mushroom, something else that Mario hated, is just hilariously on the nose. Especially with how Peach force-fed into both of them. And to top it all off, Bowser ends up in a cage, just as he did to poor Luigi. Talk about just desserts. Which is pretty good timing considering we're just about through our 11-course Mario movie analysis meal. But there is one final point I want to address, or perhaps the lack of one. So after all of this, I have to ask, what is the point of making a Mario movie if it merely aims to be a near-perfect adaptation of the games rather than something more ambitious? After all, as I've thoroughly documented now over the past hour, this movie is highly respectful of the source material. To the point where you might even ask, why bother watching it when you could be playing it instead? So here's the thing. There is a difference between being respectful of the source material and being slavish to it.
So bold!
As the movie explores myriad elements that the games never have, and likely never will, at least to any significant degree. Like how it features an actual story with dynamic plot beats, and characters with wants, needs, and actual arcs. Mario and Luigi have actual conversations now, and no, this didn't count. They also have a proper origin story beyond a stork did it. They even have an entire family now, which has only been hinted at before. So the very question itself of why someone would watch the Mario movie when they could just play the games instead is at best ignorant, and at worst incredibly dismissive. Because as a lifelong fan of the games, the movie provides an experience that the games simply can't. I'm never going to see Mario in the games get frustrated from falling into a pit too many times. Nor are the games going to slow down to focus on what Mario himself desires. And even if the games could provide these things, would we even want them to? I play games to, well, play them. And when I turn Mario on, please don't take that out of context. I'm expecting to be interacting and overcoming challenges all by myself, which having story sequences will only get in the way of. I actually get annoyed whenever games take control away from me for any longer than necessary. Whereas my expectations are entirely different when I sit down to watch a movie. That's when I want to see a story unfold before me, and witness how the characters manage to overcome the obstacles in their path, whether they be physical or mental barriers. So the argument that the Mario movie doesn't offer anything that the games don't already do is completely without merit. A fellow video essayist even recently argued that comic books are the better source for film adaptations because of their static images, implying that video games have little to gain by virtue of already being a motion-based medium. And to support this point, he then pointed out how the video game Super Mario Bros. Wonder looks exactly like the movie. What? Are we looking at the same thing? They don't look anything alike. Visually, the Mario movie blows the games away, both technically and artistically. Because even if the games ever do catch up on a technical level, they won't ever look even remotely like this. Simply because that's not how video games work. It's just impossible to have a Mario game remain playable while also featuring dynamic cinematic camera angles like this. As another example, for as amazing as a Toy Story segment of Kingdom Hearts 3 appears, it too has to adhere to the principles of being a game, meaning you're not going to get interesting cinematography or character reaction shots during gameplay. And I don't mean this for it all to be a knock against the games, because they're simply doing what's best for their medium. Furthermore, I would argue that as a medium, video games generally have more to gain from being adapted into film than even comics do. Because comics, like film, are inherently a story-driven medium, whereas games don't have to be. Games can get away with having a bare-bones story, or even no story at all, as interactivity is the key selling point of that medium, rather than featuring a deep narrative. Not that they can't, just that they don't need to. Hell, I would even go so far as to say that comic books often look much more like their film adaptations than the video game equivalent does. And that's especially the case for Mario. Also, it's a little ironic that Mario Wonder was a game picked by the essayist for this example, considering that Nintendo have stated themselves that the game only looks as good as it does as a direct result of the movie. I can't believe I have to say this, but movies and games are fundamentally different. Even if both might be fun, they're fun in their own ways. Playing as Mario to overcome challenges yourself is not at all the same as seeing the character of Mario overcome them himself. It's like asking, why bother riding the Harry Potter ride at Universal Studios when you could just stay home and watch the movies instead? They're two fundamentally different mediums with different goals, suitable for different purposes, and sometimes even for different people. I mean, I've just spent the past hour elucidating how the Mario movie works as a movie, including the many ways in which the source material had to be molded to work within the movie's framework. Which, even if you still think it falls short of what makes for a great movie, it's still inarguably leagues beyond what the games have done in those departments. And here's perhaps the strongest point yet to support that view. Do you remember the sequence when Mario and Peach first ventured out on their adventure? And we see them pass through a wide variety of regions like grasslands, deserts, jungle, and mountains? That is your typical Mario game, traveling and platforming from one world to the next. Yet the movie relegates that entire experience to a 30-second sequence, effectively communicating that what happens during it isn't interesting enough to show for any longer. Because in a story sense, it isn't. There's nothing to it, no drama or stakes. Narratively, it's a flat line. Because in most Mario games, by and large, the story begins before World 1 and ends after World 8. And so the movie wisely cuts that out almost entirely, because it doesn't matter. So I would propose that if a Mario movie truly had nothing to add, this 30-second sequence would have been stretched to fill the entire 83-minute runtime. But instead, it's everything else that surrounds it that actually matters. As in, all the other segments that leverage recognizable elements from Mario's world to craft something new that we've never seen before. Yes, it may resemble Mario, but it presents that world in an entirely new way. One that's respectful while also being original. And it's the former half of that equation that the previous live-action attempt lacked, because if originality is the only thing you want from a video game adaptation, why bother making it an adaptation at all? As the IP is just an anchor weighing you down at that point. Or as another way of looking at it, what's the point of making an adaptation if there aren't any rules to be followed? And as both Mario movies have demonstrated in their own ways, the real challenge of making a good adaptation lies largely in identifying what those rules actually are. And even then,
some of them can be bent, others can be broken.
And that is what the Super Mario Bros. Movie completely nailed. It not only discovered what those rules are, but which ones can be bent and which ones can be broken. It's that very understanding that allowed the movie to showcase these characters and worlds that we've known and loved for over 30 years in fantastical new ways, without ever feeling like a betrayal of the source material. And the end result of that is a movie that's just fun.
This is fun!
To the point that it left me smiling like an idiot after even several watches. I'm not joking when I say that my mood is elevated for days after watching it. Even my mom had a similar experience.
Yeah, Mom was in a great mood when she left.
So after all of this, that brings us back to the question of what is the point of a film in the first place? Is it to impart some deep lesson? Is it to take us on an emotional roller coaster? Is it to explore the human condition? Or is it just to simply entertain? And the true answer is all of the above. Any one film doesn't need to do anything beyond being the best version of what it sets out to be, even if the critical reaction doesn't always seem to back that up, as it does often feel like different criteria are applied differently depending on the film and the reviewer's own biases. But look, like I said at the very start of this video, which is what, 30 hours ago or something at this point, my goal isn't to change anyone's mind. I simply wanted to explain in video form, that's quickly approaching the runtime of the film itself, why the Mario movie works so well for those of us who did love it, and why it probably deserves more credit for what it achieved rather than what it didn't. Because there is just something about the Super Mario Bros. Movie that works, including in ways I haven't quite experienced in any other film. Maybe it's partially the joy of seeing a couple of normal blue-collar guys with relatable fears and ambitions come to grips with an increasingly unhinged situation. Or maybe it's just how genuine the entire thing presents itself. Or could it possibly be how cute and whimsical the entire movie is? Or perhaps how through even all of that, it still finds the time to explore emotional moments without bringing the movie to a grinding halt. I could keep going, but I think the main point is that there isn't just one singular element that makes the movie a success, but instead how it's a variety of elements, nearly perfectly proportioned, working together in concert to create one of the most enjoyable and rewatchable films I have ever seen. I'm not saying it's the best film ever, just one of the ones I've ever had most fun at. The fact that it just happens to star some of the gaming's most recognizable figures is just a cherry on top. So unless the act of having fun is pointless, then the Super Mario Bros. Movie is anything but. I like that name there. Hey everyone, Andre here. Thank you so much for watching to the very end of this very long video, which was also a very long time coming, as I had originally planned for it to come out on the first one-year anniversary of the one-year anniversary of the Mario movie, which sadly didn't happen. The video was itself ready to go, but YouTube decided to post all kinds of problems for it, and I ended up missing the deadline I had set for myself. So, in the long time since, I not only spent that time improving this video, I like to think at least, but also trying to make sure I could actually get it up on YouTube. And at the time I'm recording this, I'm still not 100% sure if it's going to work or not, so I really hope it does, because I need it to. But yeah, I hope you really did enjoy this video, assuming I actually got it up, as I thoroughly enjoyed the process of making it, because I wanted to do something a little bit different for myself, which was to take my skill, I like to think, for analyzing upcoming products and apply it to one that already came out, and one that I was really passionate for. But it felt like it was a space that, at least this exact topic, wasn't being addressed by a lot of people. I'm like, you know what? I want to defend the Mario movie, and here we are. Inspired by some of my favorite video essayists, which, by the way, I don't need his glasses anymore. Apologies to the guy I was inspired by, but I hope he knows I'm a huge fan of his. But yeah, I really hope you enjoyed this, because I want to make more videos like this as we move into the future in the new year. But I hope you all agree, especially after watching this, because I really had a lot of fun, putting this together, even if it took forever, to the point that I sometimes ended up feeling like Mario in this very movie, just being beaten down and tired of it all, and almost feeling like I wanted to give up because I didn't see the end in sight. But we made it through, fingers crossed, and I really can't wait to make more videos like this for all of you. And again, thank you to all our lovely backers as well for the help and support during this time. So with that, thank you again for watching. I hope you had a great year, and have a great new year as we enter it very soon, if not already by the time of this video. Thanks for watching, everyone. Catch you later. Bye.